Hello and welcome again to Governance and Technology. Today we'll be going through one of the most important videos you will be watching in this series. Today we will go quickly through a glossary of most commonly used terms in data protection. There is some overlap between data protection, data security and data privacy. So today we are primarily focusing on data protection. No matter what kind of organization you run today, you need to protect your data. Although when we talk about data protection in IT terms, we usually talk about things like backup, archiving, disaster recovery, business continuity. So today we will be discussing those terms in a very brief format, and then later in the future I will create videos on most of them completely separate. These topics are very important. They need to be well discussed on senior management level. They need to be discussed on a board level if you have a board, and they need to be looked into detail. You might think that this is something that you should give to some technical person to decide for you, and you should definitely consider taking their advice, but a very high level terms need to be very clear to you. Because in my experience, I've come across people who had very senior roles, very high salaries, even consultants who didn't fully understand them or didn't ask the right questions. You have to understand when you have downtime, when you have disruption to your business, that can lead to liabilities. And even if it doesn't go to liabilities, it will impact your business, your reputation, and more. If you do not ask the right questions, and not just ask others, ask yourself, then you are giving someone else to make that decision. If there is one thing you need to take out of this video, is that if you do not make this decision, someone else is making it for you. Doesn't matter if you're a one-person company or you're a large international company. Someone is making this decision, and this is something you should be involved. Now, if you're afraid of a very high liability because you made a decision about something that you might not understand, you can still work around that by involving other people and asking questions, delegating tasks to investigate, assess the risk, assess the responsibility, assess the business needs, potentially even hire a business analyst, and then come up with a set of requirements. I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to make this decision. If you have a trusted advisor which knows you really, really well, you might be tempted to give them to make a decision for you because they know your system probably better than you do. I would still advise you against it, and I'll explain why. There is a number of companies that I serve as a trusted advisor to, and I would never, absolutely never make this decision for someone else. I can certainly come with recommendations. I can certainly come with some comparison. Why this option? Why that option? Why this or why that? But I would never dare to make their decision. A good, trusted advisor will never make this decision for you. So why do we even need data protection? We could just put everything in a cloud and there are no problems, right? This could not be more wrong. IT has been around now for decades, almost half a century, strictly speaking, but let's say 30 to 40 years in most companies. Technology has changed and has evolved. But one thing has not changed. Similar like hasn't changed among cars, hasn't changed about planes, hasn't changed about quite a few other things. Things break. Everything that moves will fail. And we know very well that even things that do not move fail as well. If you put your data in the cloud providers, they also experience failures. You can go to any major cloud provider and you can find on their website details how many files per year will be lost. And it is not just the failure. You have a human factor. People can make mistakes. IT people can make mistakes. Your staff can just accidentally delete something. There are a lot of scenarios when someone could intentionally or accidentally delete your data. More often than not, now we are dealing with hackers. A good hacker these days will steal your data and try not to leave any trace of their presence. This is because they want to leave themselves an opportunity to come for more. Certain hackers will encrypt your data with the intention of extorting some money. Do you want to pay that? It's not always the question about money. Paying that is funding them. Paying that is showing that this approach works. Paying them means more of them will come after you and after others. Paying them is immoral. I won't go into morality, but I would advise you, just like most governments advise you, do not pay. And the best way not to pay is to be ready. The standards that we've been developing for decades, they're still perfectly fine both on premises and in the cloud. With the rise of new cloud-born experts, we are facing a skill shortage in understanding those technologies. I'm not saying that every person who just started with cloud doesn't understand it, but it is overwhelmingly true. I'm seeing more and more engineers and experts who are also assuming certain things which are simply not true. Once you start understanding technologies, the cloud technologies, the technical person, they will also start understanding the risks and the mitigation strategies which are very much similar to the on-premise systems. So you really need to have the same type of a conversation. Yes, it will be different technologies. Yes, it will be different solutions. But the underlying technology, the underlying principles are exactly the same. So now let's go through those things and make you ready for this conversation. In order for you to determine your data protection strategy, you really need to speak with a person that will talk to technical people. First conversation that needs to happen either between you and solution providers or between your trusted advisor and those providers is a proper RTO/RPO discussion. RTO stands for Recovery Time Objective, so how long it takes from disruption for you to resume your activities, and RPO discussion, which is Recovery Point Objective. If you have certain backup events, how much of time and data can you afford to lose, can you redo, and is acceptable loss? There will be numerous factors how to decide that. It depends on disruptions that you expect. You might be in an area with bad electricity. You will have very different conversation from those who run a financial institution, like a bank. They will have a very different discussion. For example, if you run a bank or a stock exchange, you will aim not to have a single bit of data lost. On the other side, if you run a company or an agency which does policy work, you might find that the amount of data being lost is acceptable, not just 15 minutes or an hour, it can be easily a day or a week. You might be tempted to say, I just want to get the best product that will cover me for everything and I will be set. I have to tell you this, there is no such product. I've implemented systems which were down in megabytes, up to 20 petabytes. And I can still tell you today, there is no system, there is no data protection solution that can cover you for all scenarios. However, if you know what are your pain points and which things you can tolerate, it is very easy to narrow the product. So there is a product for you, maybe not even just one. But there is certainly a number of backup strategies, archiving strategies, disaster recovery, business continuity strategies, which are wrong for you. Now, when I find myself in a position of trusted advisor, this is why I don't make an actual decision for anyone. Because they need to understand their trade-offs. I want to speak with my client and say, look, this is what you get, this is what you lose, this is what you aim, and then they talk back and we discuss, agree on something. And then when the event happens, accidental deletion, a hacker, a device failure, a data center outage, even the cloud provider outage, they will never call me and say, Hal, we thought you will take care of everything, how we are not having it. That never happened. Why? Simply because the expectation was set. Also, those people who were making those decisions, when they got faced by criticism, oh, why this and why that? they can turn around and say, look, we had this discussion and we chose among these options, and that was deemed to be the best for our business. This meets our risk appetite, our business needs. So RTO RPO discussion is as much as about your data as much as your relationships. I guarantee you, when your systems go down, partially or fully, everything stops. Everyone is upset. Everyone is blaming someone. You do need to have a position where you can defend the situation, where you can have a plan, where you can say, that's fine. We planned for this, and this is our way out. And after the event, you may decide to change some things, or you might just celebrate that you made the right decision. But in any case, there is nothing worse than seeing a person being lost. A decision maker, an IT person, a trusted advisor. Don't be the lost one. Backups. They've been around for decades, and they will be around for decades. It is one of the oldest ways to protect your data, and they're still needed. Whether you have your systems on-premise or in cloud, you need backups. And there are certain rules about backups, which are golden rules, which never changed. I will create a separate video about backups, but at this stage, all I'm going to tell you is backup means a process which takes your production data and puts one or preferably multiple copies of data, preferably on different systems. There will be a discussion about that. And in case your production system goes down or something happens to it, gets hacked, your cloud goes down, internet is down, data center is down, whatever that happens, you can access this data, you can restore this data and resume your operations. If you don't have backups, you are making a mistake. No matter who you are, even if you have a home system, if you don't have backups, you're risking. And I know a lot of people, a lot of companies who regretted not just not having backups, but not having backups right. Archiving. We cannot really talk about backups without touching archiving. Certain businesses and certain industries, archiving is very common. And certain businesses never archive anything and they just rely on backups. There are many strategies how you can do archiving. And archiving is still ridiculously traditional. Archiving is basically a process similar to backup where you take certain data, you put it on a cheaper storage. Cheaper, it can be cheap cloud, tapes, can be active backup system, but on a cheapest type of a drive, and you keep it for a very long time. Typically companies which archive, they archive for the purpose of regulatory compliance. But also some businesses which sometimes need to go quite back through their files, through their projects and such, will choose to archive so they have this historical access. Disaster recovery. Now here's the one which is very often misunderstood. Disaster recovery and business continuity are quite close terms. In disaster recovery, we build a system which is able to take over the role if your primary system is down for more than you can tolerate. If you have on-premise system, a disaster recovery system is more likely to be somewhere else in some other location, some other city, sometimes even another country, or you will have it in the cloud. If your system stops working, you need another one. For quite some time there have been attempts to create a proper disaster recovery system between clouds. Let's say if Azure cloud goes down, you want to be able to run in AWS. While there are some specific solutions around that, they're still quite limited. You are more likely to have two availability zones, whether is it AWS or Azure, but within the same provider on two different places. Disaster recovery is not about returning your data. Disaster recovery is here to enable you to continue doing work. Disaster recovery systems can sometimes cost even more money than the primary solution, especially when you activate them. But there are specific business needs when they are needed. A lot of companies choose not to have them. Or there are some smart workarounds these days where you can convert your backup in a disaster recovery setup. When we'll be talking about backups and disaster recovery, I will explain that in more detail. But at this moment, it's enough to know there are such solutions. Business continuity. This term basically describes itself. You need to decide how much continuity you need in order to perform your job. If your company cannot sustain any downtime at all, you will be facing significantly more expensive systems. And when I say significantly more expensive, I'm not talking about 10%, 30%, or even double the price. You're likely to deal with 10 times more expensive systems. It is not always the case. It really depends on products, but it also depends on goals. Do you remember the RTO and RPO discussion? RTO and RPO discussion will lead to answers to that question. Compliance and regulatory frameworks. You might be an agency in a government or a whole government department. You might be a not-for-profit. You could be a financial institution which is under regulation. Sometimes government decides or nominates other agencies or organizations who will decide on their behalf what your system needs to be capable of, either functionality, protection, security, privacy, and other topics. Sometimes what you need to have is already prescribed for you. If you belong to one of these regulated organizations, you should first have a look what are your requirements. Take those requirements and bring them to your RTO-RPO discussion. Once you have them there, you can go through those points. It will narrow down your options and your selections, and then you can make your final decision. Aside of traditional challenges that we were facing, it's becoming more obvious there are new challenges around us. Pandemic was a very new challenge which affected a lot of systems around the world. Risk of war was something that some countries were always aware, versus some countries were quite blissfully ignorant, but as you can tell in more recent times, nobody is spared of that risk. We are living in a changing world. Your requirements are changing every year, maybe every few years, but I can guarantee you that in any 10-year period, your requirements will change. So I hope you enjoyed this glossary of common data protection terms. I really hope it will be helpful for you. You will need those terms to make certain decisions. If you're on board, if you're in senior management, I guarantee you, you either need those terms or you already failed to know them. It is very, very important. It's one of those technology things that non-technical people absolutely need to understand on a high level. I hope you find this video useful, and I will see you soon again.